20th Energy Digicon this week. In the spotlight this week is nuclear energy, specifically Koeberg Nuclear Power Station. And we'll be talking about all things related to nuclear energy, what it's all about in terms of making up a very important part of the Western Cape and South Africa's energy mix and everything on this side. To that end, I'd like to welcome the acting Chief Nuclear Officer at the Koeberg plant, Mr. Keith Featherstone. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Featherstone. And of course, I'd like to welcome the Premier and the Premier's Special Advisor on Energy, Mr. Alvie Lester. Before we kick things off officially, just those housekeeping rules, please, for the Digicon, please do ensure that your microphone and your cameras are switched off through the duration of the presentation by Mr. Featherstone and Mr. Lester. There will, of course, be an opportunity for the public and media to pose those questions to the panel. You can do so by either putting those questions in the chat box, or you can raise those questions on the Premier's various social media platforms, or you can simply WhatsApp them to me or email them to me as well, and then we'll deal with them as we proceed. Right, we'll now head straight into the Digicon, and once again, I'd like to welcome the Premier. Very good morning to you, Premier.
Thank you very much, Regan, and to the citizens, the media that have all joined us today. Thank you very much for giving us your time. Obviously, this is the Energy Digicon, and we're going to get into discussing energy, but I cannot open it without referring, first of all, to Women's Day. And yesterday, a celebration in a calendar. I think that, unfortunately, a number of events were cancelled because of a taxi strike, and I'll get into that next. But also use the opportunity to wish all of the women in the Western Cape all the very best. And sorry, it wasn't perhaps across the province the best day that you could have had. I'll, as I said, refer to the taxi strike next. But I must say that yesterday I was in a meeting with the faith-based organizations, part of our system of management during something like a taxi strike, and just keeping all of the sectors updated. And while that was happening, I really got one piece of really good news. Everybody might be aware that a young woman walking home on Thursday after no taxis available was last seen in Philippi walking home, and she hadn't been seen for days. And I was really happy to hear yesterday afternoon that she'd been found safe and sound. And thanks to everybody, and specifically reference to the Pink Ladies for really helping us, come to a really good news story, which could have been the exact opposite. Also, just a quick reference to this ongoing taxi strike. I am disappointed that it didn't end last night. We were hoping that taxis were going to be back. The issues that are being faced at the moment are complex, and we've got to find a way in which we can keep law and order. We make sure that, obviously public transport and systems that get our citizens from A to B are safe and are effective, but also that there is law and order in the system. And this is the point of contention, and in actual fact, why the strike was called. We really are working very hard to find each other so that we can get back to normal. But I do want to say that, and in actual fact, straight after this meeting, I'm hopefully going into a meeting with the taxi industry again. But just to say that I want to thank the law enforcement officers, the citizens, the people who have gone out of their way to make sure that we are helping others get home. We are helping others when food is not available. And of course, the pressure on the system from a services point of view, chronic meds to people, specifically in the hotspot areas, making sure that we know a lot of people not at school, people can't get to hospitals. We've got to make sure that we manage those processes during this time, and we really are working hard that we can get back to normality as quickly as possible. So yeah, we'll keep you updated on other platforms. But back to matters of energy, and that's what this Digicon is about. So thank you very much again for logging on. And as usual, we'll be going over to Mr. Lester, and then also really from our side, thank you very much to our Chief Nuclear Officer Keith Featherstone for joining us today. There's always been questions around Coburg, and I think that's the perfect platform and the perfect person to come and help us. But without any further ado, Alvi, thank you very much once again, and I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thank you very much, Premier, and welcome to the public, the media, and our colleagues that have joined us on the session today. Yes, I think today is going to be a very good discussion, and I think quite topical for people to understand what's happening. But just in terms of performance, let me just bring up the presentation and we can chat about it. So just very quickly, the program again, targets remain the same. I think we're driving things quite hard. I must say on the load shedding relief package, we is specifically on the packs that we're dealing with. I think there's been quite a bit of movement on that. I think we've got the technical assessments that are taking place from vendors that have submitted responses to the tender that went to the market. And I think we'll probably see some answers by the end of this week, early next week, in terms of what products we believe would be able to meet the requirement that we've set. On our RP project, I also want to say we're ready to go to the market with this particular project. We've also got some donor funding that we're negotiating for the provincial RP, and again, also making some good headway with this. The demand side management program, we've now come up with 2 projects that we're going to take through to Energy Council probably in the next month. But we've engaged extensively both with the DSM stream at NECOM, with the City of Cape Town, and with Eskom in the province around the DSM initiatives that we will all undertake within the province. On the new generation things, I think things have moved quite quickly. We know that we're getting Stellenbosch ready to go to the market, and then George is also quite ready to go to the market. And then obviously the city's 500 megawatts dispatchable is in the market and closes at year end. So quite a bit of work taking place. Network development program, I think again, just quick brief update. Good things happening. We're engaging with some international entities to talk about potential funding for unlocking network development and unlocking megawatts within the network, both at a transmission and distribution level. And I think this is going to require us to engage likely with Eskom at a national level and with the Minister of Electricity around unlocking the transmission network in a much quicker space. But in terms of the outlook, if I look at energy availability, and if I look at the week past, the number very much the same as last week, sitting at about 57%, the energy availability factor. I think the differences that you will see is in the planned outage factor. You would see that there was slightly more planned activity that took place in last week than the week before. And if you look at the unplanned factor, you will see that there was almost a 1.2% drop in that, which meant that really less plant broke down last week than they did, this week than they did the week before. I think added to that is we are seeing an improve in the temperatures in the country. So it's getting warmer, and then obviously the load is becoming a lot less. I think the other factor that we must account for is that there have been plants that have come back and they've stayed in for the week, and I think that's positive. I think what we'd like to see is much more of those plants come back sustainably. So in terms of energy availability, very much in the same position as we were last week. I'm not sure about the imports and the use of OCGTs. I think we'll have to check if there was any additional OCGT that was done, or if the imports was maximized for the last week in terms of energy. The week ahead, I think again, this is again looking at the week of the 16th of August. And if you look at the week again, very optimistic in terms of where we want to be. I think the idea is that we'd obviously like to stay at this lower stage of load shedding as we can. What we have seen in the last week is that for periods of the day, the load shedding has dropped to stages 2, and then they have been adjusted depending on the peak and the load required. They've been adjusted up to stage 4 during those peak periods. But again, if we don't see a significant step change in terms of more plant coming back sustainably, I think we must again expect to be on average in stage 4 this week. I think when we start to see, units coming back, and multiple units coming back and staying in the system for longer periods, I think then we'll start to see a change in the color coding of the slide. We'll probably start to see a better picture going forward. I'm also hoping with the units of Kusile coming back, and some feedback from the Kuba guys, we'll also start to see an improvement in this picture as well. But for now, I think prognosis is that we'll probably stay at stage 4 for the coming week as well. Thank you very much, Premier. Thank you, Regan.
Thank you very much, Alvi. As usual, nice clarity on where we find ourselves. Obviously, this is a difficult environment for our country and the people of our province, but we've got a robust and bold plan, and we've got to keep moving towards making sure that we've got energy resilience, so that we can actually start focusing on the economy, on jobs, on everyday lives without having the energy problem. Obviously, lots of questions over the last weeks and months, specifically around Kuburg and perhaps some of the delays, etc. And so it is a great honor to have Keith Featherstone with us today. It's always best, as I think we've shown on these Digicons, bring the specialist to the Digicon. We can ask the direct questions and, of course, get the direct answers and a presentation of where we are. So, Keith, thank you very much for joining us. It is great to have you on this Digicon, and over to you.
Morning, Premier, and all listeners. I thought you were going to say it's best to get it from the horse itself. But anyway, I'll be the horse, and we'll take you through some of the issues around Kuburg. So, to start with, it's really a privilege to have the opportunity to talk to you and the listeners. We don't often get an opportunity to talk on these things, and therefore we're grateful for all the opportunities. Hopefully through this I can dispel some of the myths that are out there at the moment about what's happening at Kuburg. But it would be remiss for me to talk to the public about Kuburg and not talk about safety. So if you bear with me, can I just first go through a little bit of the Kuburg journey, and talk about safety and why we believe and always have been able to convince ourselves and the regulators, and we believe the public at large, that Kuburg is safe. And why we are also going through what is very importantly, the pain we are going through now of replacing the steam generators is all because we are applying to run for another 20 years to be able to generate electricity safely in the Western Cape for a lot longer than end of July next year, which is the current license end date for Kuburg. So let's start with the journey. Construction, as we all know, started in the late 1970s, with Unit 1 becoming commercially operational in July of 1984. Unit 2 followed just over a year later in November 1985, and Kuburg therefore has now been in operation for over 39 years, providing safe, reliable energy to the South African grid. Over that period, the importance of Kuburg to the Western Cape, however, has significantly increased. The load in the Cape, as you're aware, has increased over the time, and there's no other large base load capacity in the province. Without Kuburg, it is not possible for the transmission lines to actually supply the Western Cape load on its own. So therefore, we at Kuburg and all the hardworking staff there recognize this important role that we play, and our aim is always to ensure high reliability of the plant, which we are able to achieve, as well as to minimize the chance of both units being shut down at the same time. Now, nuclear power stations typically can run with a very high availability capacity, which means that for most of the year they're able to run and generate electricity, with only short periods of being shut down to refuel, maintain, and do what is needed to actually keep the reliability of the plant when it's at power. Unfortunately, we're at the moment in a period where we are doing interventions, which is a major, you can call it a major service for Kuburg, like if you were taking your car to a service and it's a major service, and that requires the plant to be shut down. So we have, up until now on Unit 1 that's been shut down, had no easy way out of the situation we're in, because the plant was in pieces and we had to put it back. Okay, so let's talk about the safety of Kuburg. The original design of Kuburg had to demonstrate that it could withstand and mitigate a suite of credible and incredible events, irrespective of how unlikely they were to to occur, and that had to be done demonstrating adequate safety and therefore not having any impact on the environment or the people in the living close to Koeberg. These assumptions that were in the design, or the assumptions that were in the design, had to be confirmed on a regular basis by routine testing and inspections that are performed on all the safety equipment. These are performed at a frequency that is determined based on the criticality of the components functioning to the safety of the plant, and range from daily things to monthly, some annually, some even 10-yearly, depending on what the testing is. The most severe test that we do on a 10-yearly basis, I'm not sure many people are aware of this, we even pressurize the containment building to their design pressure of 5 bar to ensure it can perform its design function. Now, this is quite a large test, and these tests take a lot of planning and time during normal outages, and it's these tests, some of these big tests, that help determine the duration of our outages of when we shut down to refuel the unit. Okay, so on top of these inspection and testing, maintenance is performed at a required frequency to ensure the high reliability of the equipment. Now, high reliability of equipment translates itself into high reliability of the units. And we are very proud at Koeberg to say that Unit 1, for example, recently has completed a 462-day operation, which was a breaker-to-breaker run. So we started the unit up from having refueled it, and the next time the breaker opened was when we shut it down to refuel it again. When Unit 1 started its outage 9 in December, it had just completed a 409 days of continuous operation. As we speak now, Unit 1 has been on the bars for 116 days. So it just demonstrates that the maintenance and testing that we are doing on a continuous basis actually gives us the assurance that the plant can and does run reliably. Eskom over the years has also continued to invest money in modernizing the plant based on international operating experiences and keeping abreast with the evolving world standards. As a result, we believe that we've been able to demonstrate that Koeberg is maintained in a very good condition, and that the plant itself and all the equipment over the years has been maintained in a way where when we did an assessment in the late 2000s, it was around about 2008, Eskom determined that it could quite safely justify operating the plant for a longer period of time. This led us to applying to the regulator for a license extension, and we've submitted the application together with a safety case that we believe demonstrates safety of the plant and asking permission to allow us to run the plant for the next 20 years. In that safety case, we identified 3 pieces of equipment that were needed to be replaced to allow us to be comfortable that we could run the plant safely. That was the reactor head on Unit 2, which has already been replaced quite a few years ago, and the large refueling water storage tanks on both units, which also have been replaced a few years ago. Then the third item is the steam generators on both units. We are now currently replacing the 3, or we have replaced, the replacement is completed, the steam generators on Unit 1, and we will be replacing the steam generators on Unit 2 starting the next outage. So why are these the only things that we need that we believe need to be replaced? In the normal maintenance of the station over the last 39 years, Eskom has, as I say, increased the level of safety of the plant, but it has also done significant changes to the plant in maintaining equipment that is needed to ensure the reliability of the generating function of Koeberg. In that, what we have done over the time, we have replaced the low pressure turbines, we've replaced the actual electrical generators, they have been rewound, we've replaced the main power transformers, we've replaced the turbine control system, so that the units themselves have continuously been upgraded from a reliability and a generation point of view, a capability perspective. And it's not just from a safety point of view that we've been upgrading the plant. So all of this led us, as we said, to actually apply for the license to extend our operations from 40 years for another 20 years. Now, this is not out of line of what is done internationally. Many plants around the world have already received extensions to operate for 60 years, and some have even received extensions up to 80 years. So as I was saying, the single biggest issue for us in terms of getting the license extension and where we are now is we find ourselves in the period where we are having to replace the steam generators. Now, everyone is aware that we have experienced delays in the current outages and in the current outage, and that there have been issues associated with false starts in previous outages of replacing the steam generators. I'm pleased to say that I can say now at long last that the 3 steam generators on Unit 1 have been replaced. What that means is all the mechanical work is complete. We've taken the steam generators back from into the outage from a control point of view, and we are now in the process of flushing the steam generators, following which we will go do our own inspection again of those steam generators, because in the nuclear industry, what we will do is once they've installed completely, although they've been tested, everything along the line to verify they're in a good state, the minute just before we put them in service, we'll do a complete inspection of every single tube on there. That gives us what we call our pre-service inspection. And those results are what we use then throughout the remaining life of the station to compare when we do inspections, as part of the routines that we do, we'll determine whether there's been any in-service degradation of that component. So that is a very important activity we need to do. But once that activity is complete, we really go into the phase now of refueling the reactor, heating the reactor up, taking the plant away, commissioning all the systems, and synchronizing to the grid. Once the unit is synchronized to the grid, there's still a hang of a lot of testing we need to do, because we've now got to make sure that the control systems are tuned from a feed water point of view to manage and to accommodate the new steam generators that have been installed. So although we'll be synchronized to the grid for quite a while, we will be performing tests at different power levels, and it's only once all those tests are complete will we consider the unit to be commercially available and available to the grid to dispatch in what we would consider to be a reliable manner. That date we have set, and we believe from a confidence point of view, we're talking about the unit will definitely be back by the 3rd of November. Our plans on site obviously are looking to try and make sure we better that. But what the concern is, I think, for the people in the Western Cape is that, okay, what does that mean for Unit 2? So the Unit 2 outage has been now scheduled, and that's why the date that we established for Unit 1 is so important. Unit 2 is now set to start its outage on 7th November. So on the 7th of November, we will start the replacement of the steam generators during that outage that starts on the 7th of November. We have estimated that we will need longer than what we originally planned based on the experience from Unit 1, and we'll be taking all the lessons that we've learned from this outage into the Unit 2 outage to make sure we can do it as speedily as possible. As I mentioned earlier, that is the objective of us always at Koeberg, is to make sure that we've got at least one unit online, preferably both. And our track record shows that when the units are online, they typically run reliably. So if you look at it now, even though we've been through the Unit 1 in a much prolonged outage, much longer than what we were hoping for, there have not been significant periods where there's been a challenge or a risk to the Western Cape for both units being down. We have had a few hiccups on Unit 2 while we've been in the state, but nothing that has caused any concerns to the supply from Koeberg to the Western Cape. With that, in summary, I think all I want to say is, yes, we've had delays in terms of the Unit 1 large outage that we're in now, but as I say, it's an intervention we have to go through to allow us to get into a position to continue doing what we've been doing for 39 years, which is supplying reliable energy to not only to the grid, but to the Western Cape, who desperately need it, because there's no large base capacity other than us at Koeberg. So we understand our role, we understand the impact we have on the Western Cape, and all I can do is give you the assurance we are actively working, and all the staff at Koeberg are working day and night to try to bring this unit back as soon as possible, and that's been what we've been doing over this whole period. But unfortunately, it has taken a lot longer than what we were originally anticipating. I think that in a nutshell puts it into perspective, Premier and Lester. I don't know if I think we can then take it over and go to questions and answers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Featherstone. I think that was the question, the issue on everybody's minds, and you've gone into great detail there on giving us assurances about this refurbishment process. So I think we can move on with other questions. I do note that we have received one or two via WhatsApp already, and I think let's just kick it off as we are pressed for time. I think this question speaks generally to the issue of nuclear power. It does seem, and the question goes, it does seem that nuclear power is still being used in a very limited capacity in South Africa's energy mix. Mr. Featherstone, what are your views on expanding nuclear energy in this country, making it more, well, expanding the component of nuclear energy in our energy mix? Is this viable? Is South Africa able to do that? I think that's another big question that a lot of people have been mulling over the years.
So I'm a nuclear person through and through, you can tell. I've been at Koeberg since as far back as I can remember, 1984, I think I signed up for Eskom in Koeberg. Nuclear energy, if you look at the global mix of what the global trends are, with the drive to reduce carbon emissions, nuclear is definitely seeing a resurgence in the world. We have had the privilege of being able to say we're the only nuclear power station on the African continent. That, however, we're losing that status because you must probably all aware that Egypt is in the process of building 4 nuclear units. So very soon we'll have company on the African continent. We do have the experience. We do know how to manage safely a nuclear power station. So within Eskom, as a state-owned entity, we've got a hang of a lot of experience in doing that. Do we believe it's a good thing? If you look at it, I don't think from a baseload point of view. Now, there's going to a lot of people argue, do you need baseload or don't you need baseload? You really do need some capacity that you've always got the reliability to know that it's there and you can ramp it up and down as you want. Now, new nuclear power stations can be ramped as fast as you want between their load limits. And the technology is definitely viable. So I know the DMRE is looking at it as per the IRP. You know, the IRP has got 2,500 megawatts of nuclear energy at a pace and cost that is affordable to the country. By the number of projects that are starting all over the world, there must be a case to show that it can be done viably. And therefore, if you ask me directly, is it possible? I believe it is possible. Do we need it? I believe we do need it because we have to transition away from coal. It might take a long time, but we do definitely need to transition away from coal. And although renewables have a very important role, you've got to always look at the availability factor of the different technologies. And from a renewable point of view, you actually need to accommodate the fact that it's not a dispatchable technology. And as the minute you make that accommodation, the costs of them come up significantly. So it's all a matter of finances and being able to verify that it can be done in an economical, viable way. But I believe based on what's the trends in the rest of the world, it can be done.
Thank you, Mr. Featherstone. Just a reminder to all those who've joined us online, you are welcome to raise those questions in the chat box. If you're watching us from the social media platforms of the Premier, you can also raise those questions on those platforms, or you can WhatsApp them to me. Speaking of WhatsApp, another question's come through on WhatsApp, once again directed towards you, Mr. Featherstone, speaks to Koeberg's license and the renewal of its international license. Is the delay in the refurbishment process, is it likely to impact on this license?
So again, thank you. On that point, first I need to maybe just clarify something. So the license for Koeberg actually is issued by the National Nuclear Regulator. So it's a national license, it's not an international license. So they are the body that actually regulates what we do. So all those inspection programs, the testing programs, the maintenance programs, the design basis of the plant, verifying that the design meets all the requirements, is all the responsibility of the national regulator. So We have applied for the extension. We've applied and submitted our application to the regulator. With that, we have submitted a safety case, which we justifying through which we are justifying why we believe it's safe for Koeberg to operate time. One of the assumptions in that safety case is that the steam generators will be replaced, because as Eskom, we were comfortable with the safety of the steam generators up, and we knew we could make it last for the original assumed design life for 40 years. But what we realized is we could not justify to ourselves that we could run for another 20 years with the steam generators in those conditions. We were also starting to approach the plugging limits on the steam generators, which is a requirement and a limitation within our design. So we know we have to replace them, and we committed that we would replace them as part of our commitment in terms of the application for long-term operation. So there's no link ultimately between the safety case and the delays that are not impacting that license application in any way, other than if it wasn't done, the NNR would not be able to give us a license. So Unit 1 has been replaced now, and Unit 2 will be replaced in the upcoming outage. So in theory, there's no direct link between the delays and the issuing of the license.
Thank you, Mr. Featherstone. Two more questions to you via our Digicon platform here. The first one, in light of 50,000 megawatts to 60,000 megawatts of variable renewable energy planned and expected to be on the grid by 2032, what benefit can 2,500 megawatts of inflexible nuclear power by 2023? I hope that question makes sense to you.
It does, but it's a question that I don't think I'm in the position to answer directly. The need between baseload, intermittent power, and renewables and all of that, that is an issue for the debate in terms of what is the energy mix that you want that we need in the country. The bottom line is, if there's a need for baseload, then nuclear is one of the only clean baseload sources that as an option that we have in the country. So the question that's being asked there really needs to be posed to the decision makers to actually say is, what is the technology we want and what is the mix we need in the country?
Mr. Featherstone, a follow-up to the issue on the refurbishment process underway at Koeberg. It's being asked here if you could just clarify, what date will Koeberg Unit 1 be back online generating electricity for commercial service at full load again? I think you did mention the 3rd of November 2023. If you could just clarify that or confirm that, please.
Yes, I can clarify that, but I would just like to make sure that it gets clearly communicated in what I actually said. That is the date by when we have been able to determine, we can say with confidence the unit will be back. It's not the date that we are saying it's going to be back. We're wanting it back earlier, but it's a date that's important from a planning point of view, from a generation capacity planning point of view, so that they can put it in the mix in terms of what they're doing. So that's the date we've said we will be back by that date, but so, if you talk about project planning, you get a date that you've got a 80 to 100% confidence that you're going to meet, and you get a date that you have a 50% confidence you're going to meet. That is the end date that we're talking about, the 80, 100% confidence date that the unit will be back. We don't want to get back into a situation where we've spoken about previous dates in terms of when the unit's going to be back and we can't make it, and those were more optimistic plans rather than a realistic plan. So the 3rd of November is when the unit will definitely be back, and that's the date that we've been using to allow us to determine when the start of the Unit 2 outage will be planned from.
Thank you for that. One more for you, Mr. Featherstone. Why is the shutdown of Koeberg Unit 1 lasting 10 months? It says here from December 2022 to October 2023 instead of 5 months as planned.
So that's clearly the delay in the outage has all been associated with our unrealistic belief of what could be achieved in terms of the steam generator replacement. There's been no other technical issues associated with the unit. The unit was shut down as per schedule. We handed it over to when we talk about the steam generator replacement team, and it's actually just been the time and the delays in installing that the steam generators. Now, when I talk about delays in terms of it, it's also it's unfortunate that the delays themselves are not in terms of the critical activities that were performed. It's just the size of the activities, the scope of the project. the physically handling the steam generators, removing all the equipment that was close to it, the platforms that we need to have a normal access during the operation of the unit. So it's just a matter of the logistics of doing everything that was the problem, and we were finding a few unexpected issues in terms of this. One of the platforms might have, the plans might have identified it was welded in place, and when we get there we find it was welded and bolted in place. So all of those things in the nuclear industry add time in terms of what you've got to do. Now you're going to ask, well, why don't we know about the as-built condition of the plant? Remember, these are platforms that are access platforms. They're not part of the actual plant, the operational part of the unit. This is all associated structures that actually we need to give us access to maintain and operate the plant. So it was all issues like that. One of the predominant issues of the delay was also the integration of foreign workforces with local labor in terms of local workforce, because the contractor also used a lot of local resourcing to actually help to perform the work, which was very good from the local economy point of view, and it had its pros and its cons. But part of the delays we found was due to the coordination of the different resources, and their experience levels in terms of working in the nuclear industry actually caused some of the delays that we were experiencing. But for example, things like the welding of the primary circuits and all of those, when we got to that point and the welds were performed, they were performed in excellent conditions, with excellent quality, and none of the welds actually had any defects that needed to be repaired. So, you know, those welds on the primary circuit, for example, are X-rayed, they're dye-penned. There's so many different inspections that get done on them, and they're all passed first time with flying colors. So, you know, we have to take our hat off to the contractor as well when it comes to the quality of the welds that we did, which is really the critical part of the replacement of the steam generators. That went very well. It was just the coordinating from a logistics point of view to allow us to get to that point, and now to come out of that point by rebuilding all the support activities where we've just taken the delays. So we were, in a nutshell, we were overly optimistic in terms of what we thought we could achieve. And in hindsight, if we had done it differently, we would have scheduled a lot longer time for this intervention.
Thank you, Mr. Featherstone. As I mentioned earlier, we are running up against time, so I've just got two more questions, one directed towards you and the other to Mr. Lester. So, Mr. Featherstone, one last question for you here. Has the NNR agreed to separate the licenses for Coburg Unit 1 and Unit 2 yet? If not, when is this expected? And then the second question for Mr. Lester, just I suppose a dummy's guide to the terminology around everything in the energy space. If you could maybe just demystify and explain, Mr. Lester, what exactly is meant by base load. But over to you first, Mr. Featherstone, regarding that first question.
Okay, so we applied a while ago for the change in the license, because the NNR issued the license, a variation 19 to the license to us way back in, I think it was 2019, and in which they gave one date for the expiry of the operational license for Coburg. Now, as I mentioned in the talk I gave earlier, is that Unit 1 started operation in 1984, and Unit 2 in November of 1985. So that's a difference of a year and a half, yet there's one date in the license for expiry of both units, yet the safety case for the units talk about a 40-year operational life of each unit. So if we were not going for a long-term operation and applying for a license extension, our argument was that we would expect to have had different dates in the license for the end of the license. Now, we've given that application to the regulator a while ago. They've looked at it. They've asked for some additional information from us, which we are now in the process of collating to give back to them to allow them to hopefully issue that license. But that being as may, whether they issue that license or not, if they issue us a license for long-term operation, allowing us to run operation later for extended period, this requirement for this license change doesn't have any bearing. But what we will be doing is we will be asking that if and when they issue us a license for an extended period of time, that it will actually specify a different end date for each of the units.
Thank you, Mr. Featherstone. And just that last question for Mr. Lester. Thank you.
Thank you, Regan. So baseload really refers to the energy that the country requires, not during peak, but typically over a normal period. So if I use an example, we would possibly on any particular day as a country, we should be using anywhere between 28 and let's say 30,000 megawatts. And then over the peak periods, which is 5 to 7 in the morning and typically 5 to 7 or 8 in the evenings, that load goes from your 28 to 30,000, jumps up to 33,000. And what it means is that in that period, there is additional requirement from the country for energy. But the base load really refers to the period when there isn't all these additional requirements. And it's the normal profile that the country has in non-peak hours. The plant is also then divided into areas such as baseload plant and peaking plant. Baseload plant is predictable load, and therefore we can use, let's say, the Koeberg power station, we could use the fossil fuel power stations in the country, and we can quite easily manage the baseload because it's predictable. We know exactly what level of energy the country is going to require, and we then run those baseload stations to cover the baseload demand from the country. At 5 tonight, when the country requires additional energy fairly quickly and for a short period of time, Eskom would then switch on the peaking plant, and that is typically, you could use hydro for peaking. In the case of Eskom, it would be Palmit. In the case of the city, it could be Seenbras, and you could also switch on your gas turbines at Ankerlig and Gorikwa, and that will give you that peak energy required for that short period of time. So it's very dispatchable. You can switch it on and off quite quickly. It comes on stream very, very quickly, and it's available immediately. Obviously, peaking generation is more expensive, but baseload refers to the non-peak windows of energy that the country requires, and doesn't factor in any peak energy required. I hope that's a bit clearer. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lester. I'm being pushed just to deal with one more question here. So if we could just, Mr. Featherstone, if you could indulge us just for 1 or 2 more minutes. It's a follow-up, and I hope I have the correct one here. Why is the shutdown of Koeberg Unit? No, we've dealt with that. Why is Koeberg Unit 1 planned to shut down again for 200 days starting 21 July 2024, the same date when the Koeberg Unit 1 license expires? Mr. Featherstone, if you could kindly just respond to that one last question.
So I can. The reason why we've chosen that is because we need to have a period of certainty in terms of the planning. So not knowing, and because the license actually is not in our hands, it's in the hands of the national regulator. The decision was taken by Eskom is that we will start the Unit 1 outage on the date that the license expires. So therefore that is the date when we schedule the next outage to start. We don't believe we are in a position to go do any horse trading with the regulator in terms of changing that, because that is the date. Should we get a license for longer term operation sooner, that we can still factor it in the planning phase, we would actually like to delay that outage longer, but that's not in our control. The duration of that outage is 200 days. Do we need 200 days? At this stage, no. I mentioned the containment integrated leak rate test. That is the only test and big intervention besides normal maintenance and refueling activities that we'll be doing in that outage. However, we have made provision from a capacity planning inside generation by flagging that outage to be longer, just because we are not sure whether the regulator might give us some other conditions or requirements that we might have to fulfill in obtaining in them issuing us the license for long-term operation. So our expectation is that it will not be a 200-day outage, but we've made provision for the off chance that there might be some other conditions or some other activities we have to perform based on the regulator's assessment of the application for long-term operation. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Featherstone. And once again, thank you very much for joining us on this platform. Really informative. It's exactly why we don't have politicians talking about this. We have the specialists who know exactly what they're talking about. So we really value you spending some time with us on this Digicon platform. Before I go back to Mr. Lester, I just wanted to say one of the questions that came through was the component that nuclear plays and what about the future. And just to remind everybody that in the province, we've now set ourselves a target, as Mr. Lester keeps on reminding us, of 5,700 megawatts of power coming back into the system. But one of the plans that we are busy working on now is what is the provincial IRP, or integrated resource plan? How much power would come into the province's system from renewables? What base load would there be? What is that medium load? What are the other interventions? Steenbos Dam upgrades? Are there other potential systems, and what does that mix look like? And that is one of the plans that we've said we will put in place. And so that ball is rolling. It just gives us a context of what kind of power we see over the medium to long term being the mix of power of energy in our system. And of course, if we want to play an economic role in the country, on the continent and in the world, if we want to export our products to the world, we've got to make sure that we've got really clear lines in the sand about that movement that we were speaking about, from fossil fuels to renewables, because that enables us to be part of a competitive world instead of paying punitive fines, etc., or costs, because we're still so reliant on old energy or fossil energy. So I'm looking forward to that RP coming out. But with that, I also want to just say thank you very much to everybody who's taken part. Those questions coming in, we always like to answer the questions that get sent to us, and also obviously during the week, if there's other things that you want dealt with, we will start to incorporate that in perhaps the next guest. Perhaps in finding other ways of getting those questions answered. We are on track in a change in energy in the Western Cape because of a crisis. Never waste a crisis. Make sure you can find opportunity out of it. And of course, we are trying to make sure that we get load shedding in our households, in our businesses, in our lives, to slowly but surely start to become something of the past. With that, I want to hand back to Mr. Lester, but say thank you very much and for joining. Hand back to Mr. Lester in closing to give us his tip of the week. Mr. Lester, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Premier. I think as we start to approach the spring and the sort of summer months of the year, I think our load shedding impact is going to change slightly. We'll now start to look at how do we keep things cool as opposed to how do we keep things warm in the winter. So I think going into the summer months, for those members of the public who don't, as an example, have ice packs. So what you should try and do in the summer is, freeze those ice packs. If you don't have ice packs, use old sort of plastic bottles, fill them with water and freeze them. You can start to use them as ice packs. During the load shedding, most important to then put those ice packs or those frozen water bottles amongst your cooler items in your fridge and freezer. And that does last for up to 4 hours. So you should be able to keep the things cool and fresh for at least the load shedding period that you're experiencing. So easy way for us to try and keep things cool and cold during the summer. I think we must just start to apply those things. Thank you very much. Thank you, Deegan.
And with that, we've reached the end of the Premier's 20th Energy Digicon. Thank you to all those who make this possible and to all those who've joined us this week and for those questions. And a very big thank you and special thank you to Mr. Keith Featherstone. Thanks for agreeing to join us for this Digicon. Join us next week, same time, for the 21st Digicon. Thank you.